Staying coordinated. It's one of the important lessons we learn in our primary flight instruction. Unless we're intentionally slipping the airplane to lose altitude quickly or to compensate for a crosswind on approach to landing, the idea is to keep the ball centered. But in some aerobatic maneuvers, the rules change. One pilot was learning aerobatics and tried to stay coordinated in a particular maneuver and found himself out of airspeed and unable to recover. What caused it? We'll find out on this episode of The Rider Report. Hello everyone, I'm Rob Ryder, and welcome to episode 2 of AvBrief's Rider Report podcast, brought to you by Avemco Insurance. On today's episode, my guest, Nate Van Coops, was getting checked out to fly aerobatics in a Stearman biplane. His instructor in the back seat was teaching him to do an aileron roll, but in trying to stay coordinated, he got out of coordination, and that 2,700-pound primary trainer ran out of energy. How it happened and what he learned is Nate's story, and he'll share it with us right after this message from Avemco. Not all aircraft insurance policies and companies are the same. Avemco Insurance Company never works with third-party insurance agents or brokers and believes you're better off going right to the source instead of through a middleman. We connect you with an aviation underwriter ready to answer your questions and personalize coverage based on what you fly and how you fly it. So unless you reach out to them yourself, you'll never experience the Avemco advantage of going direct. Rider Report listeners save 5% and are eligible for even more savings through the Avemco Safety Rewards Program. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/riderreport today. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco-recognized training and memberships. Now, the Rider Report. My guest today on the Rider Report is an author with whom I made contact through a very, very circuitous route. And it was through an audiobook narrator, one of the top guys in the business. And all of a sudden we're connected because of aviation and because of audiobooks. Nate Van Coops, welcome to the Rider Report.
Thanks for having me on, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your books that you have written are aviation-centered, but you've got some real-life experiences too. Tell us, if you will, how you got involved in flying and how aviation and writing came together for you.
I started out in my flying journey pretty early on. I started as a teenager. I lucked out that I lived down the street from this little grass airstrip in Hanover, Pennsylvania, and a friend of my parents, someone they had met, had a little Cessna 152, and he was given lessons. And one day my parents offered for me to go get a ride, and I loved it. I was immediately hooked. And it was a smart move on my parents' part because, you know, it keeps a teenager in line when they've got something that cool to do. And I earned my first solo on my 16th birthday, and from then on, I was just, hooked. And I always had a creative side too. I was really into art in high school, and that was kind of like my big debate after high school, what I was going to do. And
you were a visual artist doing painting and things like that?
I was doing drawing, a lot of pencil drawing. I did do some sculpting and things like that, but mostly it was drawing. I did a lot of portraits, things like that. And I went to art school for a hot second. But then that was partly my mother's side. My mother, she's very creative and an artist. And then, but her father was a pilot. So I had all those things in the family genes, but eventually I kind of decided, well, I'm going to go to flight school and then try to do something creative on the side, as opposed to try to do art as a living and do flying on the side, because as we all know, flying as a hobby is a bit expensive. It's hard to pave the way to an aviation hobby with your creative art. So thankfully, now that years have gone by, I have had a wonderful career in aviation for over 25 years and have also kept up with the creative side, although it turned out to be books instead of drawing. So I started storytelling.
It really is amazing to hear you say aviation and art, and one being a fallback from the other, that most people would look at both and consider them both fallbacks and get a real job to help support either of those, or in your case, both of those, what were hobbies. Your career in aviation spanned a long time, as you said. Tell me about the progression from your private ticket and your solo on your 16th birthday and all the way up to what you fly now.
Sure. I jumped from, being a private pilot directly into an instrument and commercial flight school down. It was in South Carolina at the time. It was a place called North American Institute of Aviation that's no longer around. But I did a crash course, 141 school there, and got those out of the way. But then I went back to this was Carroll County Airport that I was flying out of at the time, and got a job with a guy named Detour Dave, who was flying traffic patrol, morning and afternoon rush hour traffic around the Baltimore Beltway. So I did that, racked up a quick, 600 hours or so in this World 172, which I'm not sure I would fly it today. Now, after having been a mechanic and knowing more about airplanes, like I would probably have thoughts about getting in that plane.
You are saying the maintenance was possibly questionable, but you flew traffic for this guy. You were up at early in the morning, and did you do morning and afternoon drive both?
I did, yeah. So I do 3 hours in the morning from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then I go back and fly from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. So I get about 5 hours a day and buzzing around the Beltway about 1,400 feet. I was broadcast for. There was a bunch of us up there. We'd all circle traffic accidents like vultures. 4 172s and a couple of helicopters all circling around the same accidents. It was busy, but it taught me a lot about Class B airspace. It made me really comfortable on the radios and racked up some of those high value hours early on that you need as a pilot to get into other things. So
let me ask specifically with respect to how you communicated with ATC as well as the other aircraft when you were circling those accidents and those scenes where traffic was important. Did you all select different altitudes so that everybody would have a safe block, or did you do it by speed, or how did you work that out? Because that's really, really tight. If you're talking 6 aircraft circling one wreck on a freeway on the Beltway around DC, that's dangerous flying.
it is, and they stacked us pretty tight. We all had assigned altitudes. So there were 2 helicopters below me. I think they were at, they were able to operate lower altitude.
Sure.
But I was the lowest of the 172s, I think, and I was at 1,400 feet. And then they had another one at 1,600 feet, another one at 1,800 feet, and I think another one at 2,000. So I think all 4 of us would be circling. The one big challenge was that Dave, the guy I flew with, liked to fly left seat. So, which put me over in the right seat, which was fine because it was great for, earning right seat hours and building towards, that comfort level when I eventually became an instructor and things like that. But I was flying left turns and everyone else was flying right turns. So we'd be coming around these circles with only, 200 feet of separation, hoping everyone set their altimeters correctly and, buzzing around each other. And there were some close encounters there where you really, made sure you stuck to your altitude and, didn't vary much. So, there's commercial maneuver limitations on that check ride for a reason. They make you hold tighter tolerances. And then this was a real crash course in understanding why it was important to hold those altitudes, because it could have been messy otherwise.
Nate, you said that your reporter, Detour Dave, what a name, liked to fly left seat. I'm assuming that he had at least a private pilot's license. Was he flying and reporting at the same time? And if so, was he a good enough stick to maintain altitude separation? Because it would seem to me that the division of attention and the workload would make it a bit dicey for you.
He was a private pilot and he was the owner of the aircraft, but I'm not exactly sure how many hours he had in, obviously he had a zillion hours in the aircraft, physically in the aircraft, but I don't know how much of it he actually did flying. He tended to like someone else to fly the airplane for him. So, he was a veteran, broadcaster. And so he would be, like you said, busy talking on the radio. There was a couple different radio stations. We do a rock station and also an AM station. And, it was very routine for him. But it was, me, a brand new commercial pilot, low hours and, it was all fresh to me. Although it was funny, there was one time I remember, where it was so warm. It was wintertime, but we were running the cabin heat, and it would get pretty cozy in there. And I remember Detour Dave nodding off over there because it was so routine to him that he would just fall asleep in between calls sometimes. And then I would tune in the ADF to pick up
The
the
AM
local
station.
AM radio station. Yeah, so I could listen, and then I would hear them calling him, and they'd be like, Dave, let's go to our eye in the sky, and I hear what Dave, I'd nudge him, with my elbow, hey, Dave, wait, they're calling you. You got to say something. And he'd pop up, and he would ramble off a traffic report, because he could do it in his sleep, it's apparently. And it sounded great. He had, like I said, he had a great radio voice and was a well-known personality on the radio.
Well, from building time, then you moved on to other things, including an A&P, I think I heard you discuss in there. So tell me what else happened out there, and did you wind up, was your goal the airlines?
It never was. No, I was one of a couple of guys that was in flight school, and my roommate and I both wanted to be bush pilots. That was our eventual goal. And that was what also led me down the road towards an A&P, because when I went to my flight instructor training, I met a guy who was doing the bush flying thing. He was flying for a mission aviation fellowship in Africa, and it sounded amazing. And I thought, you know what, I'd love to get out there and do some wilderness flying. And most of those jobs, when I started looking around, they didn't just want a commercial pilot. They wanted a commercial pilot with an A&P. And I said, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to go to A&P school. And at the time, I had been doing a stint with the airlines. Actually, I was working as a ground crew up in Rhode Island for Continental. This is right after 9/11. And then I used my airline benefits and flew down to sunny Florida, to Clearwater, and there was a school down there. And I took one look at the beach and thought, okay, yeah, I can be here for 14 months. This isn't too bad. So I got my A&P, and then of course you need a couple of years of experience too as an A&P, that not just the license. So that I went out down to Venice, Florida for my first A&P job. So it was a kind of a combination of learning how to be an A&P plus doing some flight instruction on the side, because I was an instructor at that point. So I'd fly evenings and weekends and work in the shop during the day. And it turned out to be an amazing lifestyle. I found out I really liked the job of being an A&P. I liked the day-to-day of it, the being outside but kind of indoors. You'd smell the rain when it was raining. You'd be hot when it was hot. It was this connection to nature a little bit, while also constantly being involved with working on aircraft. It turned out to be a really cool career, and I just stayed at it for a while. I ended up doing some traveling. I didn't become a bush pilot, but I did do some traveling, did some road tripping, and volunteer work down in Mexico, things like that. But then I came back to Florida, and I landed at Albert Whitted Airport, which is a gorgeous spot right in downtown St. Petersburg. And once I landed there, I thought, man, you know what? I am going to be hard-pressed to find a better, prettier little airport than this. And it was true. I've been here 20 years and love every minute of it. So I still do want to get out and do some more remote country flying. I actually was researching Alaska this week and looking at some of their float flying and tailwheel adventures stuff they offer up there. And I'm itching to get out and do some more of it still. But I do get to do a fair amount of tailwheel stuff. I've been flying a Champ locally, and I still kind of go back to my roots a lot. That first grass field that I learned on, it calls to me. So I go back to as many grass fields as I can find usually.
Well, grass fields and tail draggers figure into the story you have for us today. The Boeing Stearman, also nicknamed Yellow Peril, made history on grass fields and remains, if you will, one of the most aviation romantic planes of all time. Set us up for what happened when you were flying in the Stearman.
Sure. So yeah, I stumbled into this opportunity. Because of being an A&P, I've been working for a lot of years, and I was taking care of some airplanes, and a couple of them were these aerial photography planes. And one of the local pilots, his name's Tiki Tom, he's been flying for this aerial photography company for years, and he also flies a biplane. He flies this 1941 Stearman, and there is a biplane rides company at Albert Whitted, and they give rides to passengers. It's wonderful. They'll do aerobatics. It's a fantastic opportunity for people to come up and experience the beauty of St. Pete from the air, especially flying over the beach. And, went up for a ride with them one time, and then eventually they said, hey, would you be interested in, potentially being like a backup pilot for us? We could use more pilots. And I immediately said, of course. And this has been a dream ever since I was a teenager. My very first Stearman ride was back when I was young, and it hooked me. First time doing aerobatics in an open cockpit biplane. I was toast. I said, you know what? I don't think it gets any better than this. So I've been training with Tom and going up and doing some flights. And of course, learning to land the Stearman by itself is a little bit of a challenge because you can't see much in those airplanes. Visibility is not what they designed that for. But once I had that down, we started working on the aerobatics, and it's primarily loops and rolls that we're working on. And the loops are fairly straightforward. You're nosing down, doing about 140 miles an hour. Loose, grip on all the controls, and then just pulling back basically. Once you get your speed up, and then it's a very stable airplane to loop. Plenty of power to go up and over and around, and it's a 1G maneuver. You're really not hanging on your straps much, when you're upside down. It's a pretty gentle loop. It's big and slow.
When you say it's plenty of power, this was not a super Stearman, a 450. This was a 220, correct?
It's I want to say it's a 7-cylinder Continental R470 is the engine, I believe. So which is a 200 horse engine.
Right.
Yeah. But depending on the propeller, it's got a couple different propellers, a wooden propeller and a metal propeller, and it has a little bit of different climb performance depending on which prop you put on it. But yeah, it's a comfortable flying airplane. It's very stable. And of course, those things were built to train World War II pilots who didn't know what they were doing yet. So they were built to withstand, I think, 9 Gs. It's a very impressive, sturdy airplane. Not fast. It's very slow. Getting up to altitude takes most of the time. Getting up there, you're not getting anywhere quickly. It's like riding an
Well, at least you're not in a situation where you have to use a Gosport to communicate one way or the other.
Yeah,
you had some better avionics with a good intercom.
True, we did have a good intercom, which was good, and it came in handy because one day we were working on our rolls, which was something that I wasn't super familiar with prior to this. I haven't done a lot of aerobatics in the past. I've got a fair amount of table time, and I was comfortable, learning to fly the Stearman, and the loop, like I said, was pretty intuitive. Just pull the stick back and loop. But the roll turned out to be a little bit more challenging than I thought. And there was one particular instance during a lesson where I accidentally did some inputs that really hung us out to dry for a minute. So I had gone into it, and in the Stearman, the proper procedure for the roll is to still, you pitch down for about 120, you pull up, you get the wheels on the horizon, and then you kind of, with a loose grip on the stick at that point, you kind of unload the stick, and then you push it hard left. And that's really all you should be doing, is just using the stick and letting the ailerons do the work to roll this thing around, and you should have enough momentum at that point to make it all the way around the turn. And the mistake that I made, being new at this, was that I used left rudder with the input. So then I went ahead and I didn't realize it at the time what I had done, but I had accidentally deflected the rudder all the way around, which of course, pivots your tail kind of up and around. And the problem was this eats up, instead of making a nice smooth roll, you end up with this kind of funky corkscrew maneuver, and we ran out of energy coming around the bottom of the turn. So we had made it inverted. We went upside down. We came around, but then we never made it back to level again. So we ended up in sort of this knife edge where...
You were at the 270 point in the roll, 3/4 of the way around, right?
Yes, exactly. So I was... But the problem was we ran out of energy at that point, and I was pinned to the right side of the cockpit, as was Tom, who was in the front seat. Both of us were kind of stuck to the side, and then I had run out of left rudder, and the aileron was full to the left, and the rudder was full to the left, but it wouldn't go any farther to the left. We were hanging out in this sort of unusual attitude, very unusual attitude, and because Tom hadn't been the one flying, and I didn't necessarily know what I had done wrong, neither of us knew how we had gotten in the situation. And, it was only in hindsight that I kind of figured it out, but we were just sort of dangling there, partly just you're feeling like we're about to fall out of the airplane. Obviously you're strapped in and got your chutes on, but you don't want to use them. And we're losing altitude fast at this point. We had only started at, 2,000 or 2,500 feet and, with an intent to finish well above our 1,500. That deck you want to have for doing any kind of aerobatics or
Absolutely.
maneuvers. And we were bleeding through that in a hurry. In that position, and that knife edge is just the opposite of the way an airplane's designed to fly. And we were dropping fast, nose high, and it was pretty intimidating because, in that aircraft, there's already a lot going on as far as stimuli, especially the wind. And in that situation, you've got wind buffeting you in the face, and you've got the heat and the temp, all the temperature involved. It's just a lot going on in terms of stimuli.
This was still relatively new to you in terms of your open cockpit experience then.
That's correct. Yeah, because even though I had a fair amount of tailwheel time, it was in a Champ, so I'm comfortably indoors. And, it's still stick and rudder, but I've got a windscreen, a full windscreen. Same with all the hours I've got accrued in my 172 and over the years of flight instructing. It doesn't prepare you to have your face directly in the sun and the visibility issues you get and the that kind of old barnstormer experience. It's new, and it's like I said, it's just a lot. And then when you get that, and then coupled with this unusual surprise attitude where something you've never been in before, to have to kind of logically work your way through this in a hurry because you're losing altitude and figure, how do I get out of this? Like, what is the aerodynamics happening here, and what do I need to do? Because we weren't stalled. But we were, but it ended up being that we did have to get that nose to come down. And once we were able to, once I finally let off that rudder and said, you know what, I'm not going to go left. The plane's not going left. I have to give up on this idea, and we're going to go the other way. So finally just relax. And a lot of times that's the answer that a lot of student pilots don't necessarily understand is release your inputs. Like, let this airplane be an airplane, and then see what it does, and then follow along. And then at that point, we've just got gravity, thankfully bringing that nose down and putting us back into a right turn. So we were able to level back out the other direction. Completely failed to do my role as intended. But we're able to safely get back to flying level, and then, get back on the intercom and say, what on earth just happened? Because neither of us knew right out of the gate.
Did you call a knock it off at that point, or did your instructor call a knock it off and say, let's go back and sort this out?
No. Well, we talked it through a little bit in flight. And then I said,
did you try another one?
We did more. We got back to altitude and said, you know what, let's do this again. Because I didn't know what I had done wrong. And it's intimidating, not so much that you end up in a bad situation. It's just that you end up in a situation you didn't know how to get in there at all. Like, you don't know when you're going to end up there again, because I didn't want to do it again and end up. It was obviously a sort of nerve-wracking experience, and the last thing in the world I wanted to do was do it again.
I'm assuming, Nate, that because you were thinking in terms of staying coordinated, that combination of left stick, mentally you stayed coordinated and put in left rudder just as you would in a normal bank, a steep bank turn, and that's what got you there.
Yeah, and that's kind of a brand new pilot in World War II era, the 1940s, didn't have years of mental training to do that. Like, that's a problem that I have from having flown properly for 25 years. 172 or, all these other airplanes. Like, I do fly coordinated. I do put in left rudder when I turn. So this is something I try to instill in my students as a positive thing. And here it is that one positive thing ends up being a negative in this situation. It ends up to be the wrong mental, kind of muscle memory to use, where it's something I wouldn't have predicted, but it was a lively way to learn it.
Yeah, I guess the getting back on the horse and doing the rolls right away and getting it right was a very, very important thing for you. What I'd like to do, Nate, is take a break. Let's come back and dig deeper into this and find out what you learned and what you took away from this incident. We'll be right back. Whether you're a student pilot, CFI, borrowing or building an airplane, or looking to buy, a Vemco insurance company can help you find the right insurance coverage based on what you fly and how you fly it. No gotchas, no runaround, no confusing language, no middlemen. Avemco Insurance Company values safety and is a proud sponsor of the Rider Report podcast. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/Rider Report today. Earn an automatic 5% off by mentioning you're a Rider Report listener. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, back to the Rider Report. We're back with Nate Van Coops, author, pilot, A&P, and a Stearman almost veteran now. Nate, you had yourself a tough moment in there, because when the Stearman runs out of energy, it's like putting on the brakes. If you back the throttle down on a Stearman, it slows down immediately. Well, it was already slow. I'm glad you were able to pull out of it, but what did you learn through this experience?
I think the one thing that I took away from it is that there's always a scenario out there to surprise you. And no matter how many hours you have flying and how many years of experience you have flying, no matter how comfortable you are in a flight deck, there could be a scenario that comes along, it's unexpected, that is going to challenge you and force you to, use the skills that you've acquired and think through it. And hopefully you have the mental wherewithal to solve the problem, keep your head about you, and but also to not let it shake you to the point where you're intimidated or scared to get back up there and do it again. Because we learn by failing. They say failure is the best teacher. And I think in this case, I absolutely failed to execute that role. But we got back up there and did it again. And so I think that the main takeaway was that, eventually I'll be flying this plane with passengers and we'll be the sole pilot aboard, and need to make sure that I understand the ins and outs of the physics and the aerodynamics of this aircraft, and make sure that, safety comes first, and then, safety comes through training. And that's the best thing to possibly do is just to get back up there, do it again, to do the debrief. One of the things that Tom did was, after we had landed, he went back up again later and did it by himself and tried to execute, because he didn't know either. So he wanted to repeat the process, but he wanted to do it by himself and figure it out. And he did. So he kind of was able to come back, and I had been doing an exam. I'm an examiner for A&P mechanics as well. So I was doing that, but he came back and, knocked on the door. Was like, hey, by the way, I did this thing again. And this is what happened.
I meant to ask you, when you were flying when you did the roll that went bad, were you in the back seat or the front seat?
The back, yeah.
Okay, that's solo from the back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's Tom wasn't putting any inputs in at all. So I can't blame him for it. So it was all on me. And it was he is such a great pilot, and somebody who's been doing this for years. Like I said, got a zillion hours, and he kept his head too, and wasn't upset about it. It was vaguely terrifying, but he wasn't at all mad. And he was like, what, that was unexpected, but we're gonna figure out what happened. We're gonna, like I said, he went back up and did it again. So kudos.
No
to
panic on anybody's part.
No, and I think that is a valuable lesson, that panic helps no one. And, but having that safe altitude, absolutely saved us, because, it would have been tragic to do something like that at a low altitude. If you were messing around and not abiding by the minimums, that could have gone very badly. So
begin every maneuver with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice.
Yeah.
And in this case, an unexpected end. Keep it with an unexpected end in mind. So it's going to inform a lot of my decisions going forward. I think it's been helpful.
Aviation has really affected your artistic life. Now, you started out as a visual artist, but you became a novelist, and our connection began with connecting through Scott Brick, one of the great audiobook narrators on the planet, one of the greatest on the planet. And tell me a little bit about your writing. What turned you on to write about aviation, and then we'll talk about how you got connected with Scott, because that's a monstrously important and favorable and very, very happy relationship for you to have.
Mm-hmm. I've been writing, so I started kind of having this outlet. I was managing a maintenance shop for a while, and I still had this creative itch, kind of burning inside me. So I would take breaks. Sometimes I'd take these long lunch breaks. I'd go and sit with my laptop, and stories would start pouring out of me. And initially, I was writing science fiction for about 10 years. I wrote a bunch of time travel adventures and started branching into time travel detective novels, and then a couple of other kind of fantasy-esque type stories that I explored. But one of my favorite parts of this process was audiobooks. I've always, enjoyed audiobooks as a listener, and getting to meet and collaborate with talented actors, especially voice actors who have been trained and can bring this story to life in a new way, was an absolute thrill to me. I still remember walking around my neighborhood with my dog one day, proofreading or proof listening to one of my audiobooks that a talented narrator at the time named Stacey Carolyn had been reading. And he delivered a joke so well that I remember laughing out loud in front of like some neighbors who were out, watching me walk by.
Oh,
and I'm like,
that is such a win.
Yeah,
that is such a win when the author himself.
It was a joke that I wrote. Like, I knew this punchline. This was not a surprise punchline, but his delivery was so excellent that I burst out laughing on the sidewalk. And so those kinds of moments and those relationships I've had with talented voice actors have really been just the icing on the cake, and when it comes to publishing and my experience as a writer. So when I started to finally write aviation mysteries, I thought, you know what, I'm finally going to combine this. I broke away from science fiction and said, I'm going to write a contemporary aviation mystery thriller. I still want to have this sort of classic character. He's like a Reacher type, or he's a Travis McGee type, who is, guy he's a veteran with a storied past, but he's trying to live a quiet life on coastal Florida. He's living on a boat, trying to live his best life. And then trouble finds him, and then, wishes it hadn't. That's the classic guy that we've, come to know and love in all types of fiction. But I wanted to add this aviation spin, like Luke Angel, my main character, is a pilot. He grew up flying seaplanes as a teenager with his dad in Central Florida. He went off to the Army, flew helicopters. He has a dark kind of past where his father was a drug smuggler, and all that past kind of likes to bubble back up and into his daily life, his dark family history. So it's a fun world to ride in, but I get to showcase these classic airplanes. Like, he gets to fly a 1940s Grumman Mallard, which is kind of the main set piece of the storyline. But also, like in this case, the new book, Tropic Envy, which is coming out in February, I put a Stearman on the front of it because he ends up in a Stearman at one point. But I like to put him in different antique aircraft. But I needed someone to voice this story who listeners were either already listening to or would associate with this type of novel. And so I thought, who is the best possible voice I could find? What's the biggest swing I could take? And that would tie into some of these people who are already listening to aviation books. Because the listeners who are reading Clive Cussler, Lee Child, Tom Clancy, these were kind of my target audience. And a lot of these, guys are older, who have time to read or not time to listen, but maybe they've had aviation backgrounds. And the one name that kept coming up over and over again was Scott Brick. And I thought, you know what? This is the voice that I would love to get associated with my series. And I reached out to his agent, and, we had a little back and forth for a while. And, finally I was able to submit. He takes a very limited amount of indie authors like myself in his schedule because he's, so backed up. He's got publishers, and he's very in demand. But I submitted my first novel in the series to him, Tropic Angel, and his acquisitions team read it, and they ended up loving it. And they said, we're going to recommend Scott reads this. We think it's great. So I was thrilled. That was a wonderful, news for me to get. And then, we went on this experience. I had book 2 kind of ready to go at that point by the time that finally got arranged. So he recorded Tropic Angel and Tropic Descent back to back in the booth. He sat down and ripped through both of them. And then went on to read the third book of the series, Tropic Hustle, last year. And then he's about to sit down and read book 4, Tropic Envy, coming up here.
Let's go through the 4 titles again slowly, because I know that there are folks who are listening here who will want to tune in and hear your work narrated by Scott Brick. First book, Tropic
Angel. Tropic Angels, book 1 is a great place to start.
Always start at the beginning, right?
It is a good place to start. Get all the backstory.
Because, the character development throughout a series like this. I'm in the middle of a series of aviation thrillers myself right now with a former Air Force lieutenant colonel. Talk about that later. But okay, we got Tropic Angel. Mm-hmm. Then
Tropic Descent. Luke heads over the Bahamas for a fun, exciting mystery over there. Crashed plane and some missing people, and it gets pretty exciting. So that takes place in the Bahamas. It's Tropic Descent. And Tropic Hustle is book 3, where Luke's drug smuggler dad gets out of prison, and trouble ensues because he's got a storied past and a bunch of people dogging his trail looking for an old treasure that Frank Angel has possibly hidden.
Oh boy!
So that was a lot of fun to write. That takes place largely down at the Keys, Key West, in that area.
And the 4th one is in process.
Yeah, Tropic Envy will be out probably February of 2026, and when the book comes out. And I'm excited about it. Like I said, Scott's does an amazing job telling these stories. And this one takes place, it's a murder mystery that takes place largely at Albert Whitted Airport right here in St. Pete, Florida, where I am. And it features a fun cast, the flight instructors, the corporate pilots, the pilot examiners. There's a whole generally aviation cast of characters, one of whom doesn't make it, and then there's murder to be solved. So it's a fun story.
I'm assuming, Nate, that certain people down in your area will maybe recognize some of the descriptions of the characters with names that have been changed to protect the innocent. Mm-hmm. Is that something that happens with some of your characters?
I do pull.
They're based on real people.
Yeah, I pull a lot of inspiration from real people, and from obviously everyone in the story is fictionalized, and every character is a work of fiction. But they are, they come from true kind of archetypes, and there are people who do these things at the airport, especially at Albert Whitted. I use the real location, so I get to use the setting and the scenery that's all accurate, and people that have flown into Albert Whitted or come to visit will recognize all these places in the book and get to walk around and say, oh, this is where Luke's business would be, or this is the character who washes airplanes. Oh, well, that guy really exists. So it's fun. Yeah. It's been really fun pulling my 20 years of experience at that airport into a novel.
Well, it's great to hear about not only these novels, but also to have learned from your writer report experience in the Stearman what a great airplane it is. And it was just I am so grateful, and thank you very much for being on the writer report.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate your time and taking the time to talk about the books and my experience. This has been great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends that we've joined the AvBrief team, and that we really want them to join us for this new chapter in the same storytelling I've been doing for the last 5 years, just with a new name and a new home. We drop episodes every couple of weeks, so you can hear the first-hand accounts of the flying lessons that sometimes only experience can teach. If you've got a story that you'd like to share, here's my new email address, rob@avbrief.com. rob@avbrief.com. The Writer Report theme and commercial instrumental music for the podcast was written and performed by Rob Pottorff. For Avemco Aviation Insurance and avbrief.com, I'm Rob Ryder. Catch you next time on The Writer Report.